It's UofL Today on 93.9 The Ville. Here's your host, Mark Hebert.
And welcome to UofL Today with Mark Hebert on 93.9 The Ville. This is the show about all the stuff going on at the University of Louisville that doesn't involve sports. All the research, the great students, and the programming going on at the University of Louisville and its campuses. So here's the show for you, I hope, for the next 30 minutes or so. So on the show today, UofL's Leigh and Conn Prize for Renewable Energy went to a professor from Carnegie Mellon University who works on energy-saving and environmentally friendly batteries. And you'll hear what he has to say about the future of renewables. But first, there are two UofL faculty members who are studying the ethical issues surrounding the collection and use of DNA and other human and medical data. Mark Rothstein and Kyle Brothers are both with the Institute for Bioethics, Health Policy, and Law. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Both been on the program before. It's good to see you again.
It's good to see you.
Glad you're here. Mark's all dressed up in coat and tie. Looks very, very sharp. Ready for TV, right, Mark? All right.
Whatever.
Let's talk about this. Let's talk about this study that the two of you worked on involving the sharing of DNA. Somebody go first and tell me about the ethical and legal dilemmas involving the sharing of DNA.
Well, it's much in the news now, and DNA is everywhere. There is a great deal of research going on now. It's being used increasingly in clinical studies, in forensics, and there's concern as to who is going to get access to it, what they're going to do with it, and whether individuals have realistic ways of controlling how it's spread and used.
Mm-hmm. And Kyle, you guys looked at specifically, I think, whether the clinical folks are using DNA collected from their patients and giving it or using it for research purposes, and whether there were some ethical dilemmas and legal dilemmas with that, right?
That's right. And this project that is new that we've just been working on recently really goes back to the fact that we're in a very global world now. Everyone communicates online, and there are no borders on the internet. So it's really quite common now for investigator looking at an uncommon disease to want to collect DNA from everybody they can who has that disease, and that could include people all around the world. And so there's a lot of interest from researchers to get DNA from every person in the world who has that condition, and many times those people are quite willing to. They want their disease to be studied, and they want doctors to find a solution for that. So it's relatively common and becoming more common for folks to get a little spit container, spit into a little container over and over and over again, and ship it to the U.S. for research. The problem is, and Mark is the expert on this type of issue, the problem is that may or may not be legal in the person's home country. So there are a lot of questions for American researchers who want to get these kinds of samples. Well, what do I need to do? How do I do this without breaking a law?
So what are the legal issues, Mark?
So when you do research, you have to get approval by an external independent body. It can be at the university, but it could be elsewhere. It's called an institutional review board, and they have to approve you're doing the research. IRBs in the U.S. have approved this method that Kyle described of soliciting and enrolling people from other parts of the U.S. Online, but they haven't approved enrolling people from other countries. And the reason is nobody seems to know whether it's legal, say, in China for someone there without Chinese approval to volunteer to be in somebody's study in another country. And so the NIH, the National Institutes of Health, has funded our institute to basically answer that question, and it's extremely important to the future of research, especially research with rare disorders. So what we've been able to do is we've lined up experts from 32 countries that are going to work with us to try to answer the question of, is it legal in all these various countries, or what conditions are placed on it? To tell you how complicated this question is, if someone from another country, let's say France or Japan or something, wanted to do a study and directly enroll people from the U.S., if they called me up and asked, is it legal in the United States? I don't know what the answer is here either.
Okay, so that's the legal dilemma. Again, we're talking with Mark Rothstein and Kyle Brothers, who are both with the Institute for Bioethics, Health Policy, and Law at the University of Louisville. So I think what you're saying, as best I can understand it, is that say Kyle over here is a researcher at the University of Louisville, and he's studying lupus, trying to find a cure for lupus. And he wants to see all the results and DNA from folks, as many as he can get from across the world who have lupus. So he's getting a hold of folks in China, Japan, Indonesia, Russia, wherever he might be able to find some DNA of patients who've had lupus in those countries and trying to get them to the United States to his lab, right?
Right.
So the question is, is it that the individuals in those countries haven't given permission, or is it that the countries themselves have not legalized giving any individual's DNA anywhere outside of the doctor that they have in China or Russia or wherever?
It's the country.
It's the country.
Because the individuals are assumedly volunteering and participating freely and with their consent. But it may not be legal for them to do so in one of these countries. And we have an idea of what countries it may or may not be legal in, but we actually don't know because this is so new. There are no laws that specifically apply. The question is there a law on research ethics that applies? Is there a law on the export of human samples that applies, or something else? And before we can answer that question, we don't even know what the right question is, basically. So we are having a series of meetings to try to figure out from researchers, basically in the United States, as well as ethics people from around the world, what are the questions to ask? And then once we have that identified and have a common set of, let's say, 5 to 10 questions, then we'll put that out to the experts in the 32 countries.
Kyle, is the NIH wanting something just for researchers in the United States, or as Mark said, is this going to impact everybody across the world? Or is that the hope, at least, that you'd have basically a worldwide set of rules regarding the transfer of DNA samples?
I'm sure the NIH, their mission is to improve the health of Americans, and that incidentally means improving the health of everybody in the world. The scientific community works together as one. So I'm certain there is an interest in making it possible for folks in the U.S. who want to participate in important research going on in France or Germany or China to do that. But that is just adds a whole nother level of complexity. So we're focusing primarily on American researchers who are receiving samples by mail from folks in other countries.
I want to go to the next level that people might be more familiar with, Ancestry.com. I spit in the little thing, I got it for Christmas, the little kit for Christmas. You spit in the thing, you send it off, and they tell you, you're 96% Eastern European or whatever. That information, is that being shared with researchers? Are researchers across the globe getting Mark Hebert's DNA to do research on whatever?
They very well may. Yes. Ancestry.com has its own researchers who are studying these questions about ancestry and things like that. And if you've sent your DNA to a company like Ancestry.com or 23andMe, you would need to go back and look at the paperwork that you filled out to the consent document to see what you promised. But because of a nuance in the U.S. law, it's actually completely possible and legal for them to share your DNA with no name. So if they wanted to take your DNA and share it with another researcher, they could do that as long as they don't attach your identifying information like your name and social security number and those types of things.
Gotcha. All right. Mark, from your perspective, you've got a joint appointment in the law school, so you focus on the legal issues a lot. But from a moral and a social perspective, looking down the road, you've got this DNA sharing all over the planet now. You guys are trying to figure out a way to corral that a little bit. But is there the possibility that we could be looking at the sci-fi movie here in that we've been seeing, that where we got people in governments know exactly who you are and where you are and can find out what problems you have, whether you had cancer in your past and those kinds of things?
I'm afraid it's more than science fiction. People routinely agree to give up their privacy for convenience purposes. And so when you download an app online, chances are you click through something that said, I consent. And if you read the small print, it said, I consent to let you do whatever you want with this information. And if it's an app, to view anything that's on my mobile device, to maybe turn on the phone, turn on the microphone, turn on the camera and take pictures, to record your geolocation devices. And then all this stuff is stored and it's aggregated with other information that comes from all these sources. And when you get a breach, like we see periodically, everyone is up in arms and then they go back to doing the same thing they did before.
Well, that's information, but I'm talking about DNA, and you guys, as we talked about at the start of the show, you guys are looking for a way to, I don't know, kind of put all the information and get a worldwide set of rules, basically, to guide researchers. Is there that possibility out there, both good and bad, that this DNA is already being shared so widely that it'll either cause social issues down the road, or on the flip side, people would say, you know what, this is great. We got a better chance of solving some of these medical issues and some of these health problems worldwide if we can share more and more of people's DNA.
So that's the dilemma. We want the good that comes out of aggregating and doing the research, but there's also a downside to it. If we don't have controls on who gets access to it, the information can be used in all sorts of nefarious ways. And there's a link between the medical information and the medical specimens, including DNA, and all these other things that exist. And we are now on the verge of discovering what's called precision medicine. And that's a way of sort of personalizing it based on all of the individual's past health history, their DNA, plus their environmental exposures. And it sounds nice in theory, but it raises all sorts of issues, and one is very clearly the privacy.
Final word, Kyle, what would you tell patients in hospitals and folks who are having their blood drawn today?
Well, I think the example of a mobile app is a great example for help for DNA. And if folks are worried about, they're going to their doctor's office, their blood's being drawn for a test to answer, a medical question that they have, the chances of that being used for research without their permission is extremely low. Most of this use that folks would maybe be surprised about comes from the person did give permission for it to be used. They sent their DNA sample to Ancestry.com.
Right.
It's this secondary use that they didn't know about. That's really where we would warn people just to be careful and to be aware of.
Okay, we didn't even get to talk too much about the National Precision Medicine Program, which you guys have also looked at. You guys deal with a lot of interesting stuff, and I'm sure you got some other things coming up. We can talk more about biorepositories. We'll have you on the show again, okay?
Sounds great.
All right, Kyle Brothers, Mark Rothstein, appreciate you being on the show. Sitting in front of me now is Dr. Jay Whitacre, who's a trustee professor of energy at Carnegie Mellon University, but more importantly for this discussion, he is the 2017 Leigh Conn Prize for Renewable Energy Laureate, which means he won $50,000 and a big prize from the University of Louisville's Conn Center for Renewable Energy. So welcome to Louisville, Jay.
Thanks, it's great to be here.
Glad to have you. All right, so what do you do at Carnegie Mellon?
I wear a number of hats. I'm a professor in two departments, the Department of Material Science and Engineering and the Department of Engineering and Public Policy. It's a real mouthful, I know. I can unpack that if you want.
No, that's okay.
And I'm also the director of our Energy Institute at CMU, the Scott Institute for Energy Innovation. So we have a sister kind of organization at CMU that's very much like the Conn Center here.
So you work in renewable energy?
I do a lot of renewable energy stuff, a range of things. Energy storage is my prime focus, but I do a lot of other stuff.
And you won the prize from the University of Louisville for your work on energy storage. So
That's right.
tell us about what specifically you're working on and what discovery you have made, what invention you've come up with.
Yeah, I started down this path about 10 years ago when I arrived at CMU, and the goal was to find a very low-cost way of storing energy for the grid, for stationary applications. So not for cars, not for cell phones, not for computers. At the time, there was a huge hole. No one knew how to cost-effectively store the energy from a solar panel or a wind turbine when it made extra, right? These are intermittent power sources. They're inherently, low cost from their, the prime power source is free. It's sun or wind.
Right.
But you've got to figure out how to make use of the intermittency of it, right? So you need a battery to buffer that. And you have to have, at the time, 10 years ago, there were lead-acid batteries. Lithium-ion batteries were not part of the equation for this application. And there was really very little else. And so the goal was to try and use my knowledge of energy storage materials that I had learned in my early career and apply that to this question. And so I got some really good early results at CMU. We spun the company out a year and a half later. So I had a company that came from this work. And this is probably the main reason why I got the attention for this award. And the company grew significantly. We actually put a manufacturing plant in Pennsylvania, and we have manufactured over 60 or 70 megawatt hours of storage, and it has been shipped worldwide.
And these batteries that you're talking about, they're saltwater batteries.
They're saltwater batteries, yeah.
Right?
So what's cheap, right? So this is the exercise, right? What's super low cost to use in a battery? And the most abundant functional ion that I know of is sodium, right? And you take salt, you dump it in water, it solvates, and you get Na plus and Cl minus. So how do I use that Na plus in salt water? It's free, right? So is water, essentially free. So those are the two most, the two heaviest components of my battery are water and salt. So what else is there? A couple other functional components that are manganese-based or titanium-based that are also really cheap. And then there's the packaging. But everything that went into this thing was selected because it was low cost and manufacturable. And so the approach was less about being high-tech and trying to generate fully novel fundamental science, but instead to engineer my way through to a low-cost solution that can hit the market.
We're talking with Jay Whitacre, who's the trustee professor of energy at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh. He's also the 2017 Leigh and Conn Prize for Renewable Energy winner, and he's the laureate. It's a prize given by the University of Louisville's Conn Center for Renewable Energy for those who come up with innovative new inventions and things that get to the marketplace in renewable energy. So again, congratulations on winning that prize. When you're talking about the amount of storage that you can do in these batteries, are these batteries large? Are they small? How big are they? And are they something that in the future are going to be small enough to store in your backyard or something?
Yeah, they absolutely are. I mean, so something the size of a dishwasher, for example, would be 4 of our units, and it would hold about 10 kilowatt hours. And so that might not be meaningful to all the listeners out there, but 10 kilowatt hours would power the average house basically through the night. If you weren't like running your toaster all night, which typically people don't do. And so you would need 1 or 2 of these units for a typical U.S. residence, and certainly only 1 of these units for a European residence. They're smaller over there, and they're more efficient over there. So the size is that of a sort of typical home appliance, and that's sort of the key thing. If you could do it that size or smaller, then you can sort of get to a situation where people will buy it. It's definitely a lot bigger per unit energy than lithium-ion batteries. Lithium-ion batteries are about 25% the size. They're much smaller, but they also cost more, and they're dangerous. The good news about lithium-ion batteries is you can get a lot of energy in a small package, but that's also the bad news. If thing goes wrong, there's problems.
Yeah, they catch on fire as they have in airplanes and stuff before.
Yep, that's right.
And you mentioned it earlier that the storage of this energy has been the key thing that energy researchers have been looking for years and years and years. What's the next step in this, in being able to store energy, solar power, wind, whatever? You've obviously figured out a way to store it in small amounts.
Sure.
How do we get to the next step?
There's a couple next steps. The first next step is to create a stable marketplace for this kind of technology. Right now it's spotty around the world. There's a handful of places where it's either government incentivized or the cost of electricity is such that renewables plus batteries make sense, right? So that's great, but the market's not big enough necessarily for a huge global effort in manufacturing. So one of the things to do is figure out policies and economic drivers that will uniformly incentivize this technology so that it's widely accepted and adopted. Just like highways created a general pool for independent transport, or roads in general create people wanting cars to move around. What is the equivalent of that? How do these batteries become such a common thing that they're part of everyone's everyday life? That's the first question.
Okay.
The second question is, what's the right kind or duration or installation style of this battery? There's a lot of evidence that suggests if we really want to go to a very high amount of renewables in our power grid, that we need very long duration batteries. And so the next thing after this is probably, these batteries were designed to charge and discharge, over 24 hours. So 10 to 12 hours of charging, and a similar amount of time discharging every day. So with a solar panel, you would collect extra sun energy in the daytime and then discharge it at night. But that really doesn't take you to what if there's 3 or 4 days with cloudiness, or what if instead I'm on wind, what if I have 4 or 5 days with no wind? So you need a week of storage or 2 weeks of storage to really go off of any other power source, right? So what does that look like? It's a different kind of battery. I'm working with some collaborators around the country on that, which is sort of known as either ultra long duration or seasonal energy storage. The cost, the economics, the implementation are very different than this, and that may be the next thing as we sort of evolve this technology.
Well, you hope it's the next thing, right?
Yeah, well,
since you're working on it, trying to make money off it, right?
Yeah, well, money's a secondary. I just want to have impact, and the key thing is figuring out what the world can need and use.
Again, we're talking with Dr. Jay Whitacre, Trustee Professor of Energy at Carnegie Mellon University, and he's the winner of the 2017 Leigh and Conn Prize for Renewable Energy Laureate at the University of Louisville. And he's on the UofL campus for a day or two talking to students and doing some seminars. What does this prize mean to you?
Well, first of all, the prize means a lot because of where it comes from. I think the Conns are remarkably forward-thinking in how they want to create something that is impactful. And not only are they doing this here at Louisville, but they recognize that if they can create something that is national, international stature, that creates buzz, that garners interest, not just in what's going on here, but also in this field in general, they're going to move the bar. And so, what I see here is an effort, a successful effort to create momentum around rewarding people who have done this thing. And this thing is taking novel energy technologies that enable renewables and put them somewhere in the market and to the extent that something has happened that is real, right? And the more that's recognized, internationally, because this is an international award, I think it's sort of think locally, but also think globally, and they've done both here with this. And I think this award as an outreach from this program here to say, hey, this matters. We in Louisville care about this, and we're gonna recognize the best in the world, but we're also gonna do it here, and we're gonna sort of try to bring these people together. So I'm so happy to come here. I'm spending the next 2 days talking with the scientists and researchers and the program people here to understand what's happening, and I'm going to take a lot of that back to CMU. So what it means to me is a recognition of this concept of creating new technologies. It's a recognition of what Louisville has to offer in this way, and it's an exchange of ideas between institutions. And I'm here from Carnegie Mellon. I'm really eager to share what's going on.
A couple more questions for you. You worked on the Mars Rover.
Yeah.
How in the heck did you get from the Mars Rover to renewable energy?
Surprisingly, it's not much of a difference. The first 2 Mars rovers that I worked on, they was Spirit and Opportunity. They were sent, in the early 2000s. They were powered by solar panels, right? And so they had batteries and solar panels. And I was trained at JPL as a systems engineer, and the governing engineering principles around having a sustainable rover on Mars that has only the sun as a power source are about the same as the governing engineering principles of a house on Earth that also only has sun as a primary power source. So surprisingly, not much of a change. Now, it's a bit more expensive to put something on Mars that lasts a couple years and drives around the surface and collects data. But, and of course, all of the things were, it was incredible. The oversight involved with making something like that is quite amazing.
I assume it was fun.
It was great. It was an amazing time. On the other hand, I really wanted to apply the stuff that I had learned to have a broader impact. And so this was the chance for me to do it.
So you moved into that field.
Yeah.
And as you look in the future, I'll ask you the political question: is the United States as a whole doing enough to capture the renewable energy market, or are we getting beaten to the punch by China and other countries?
Yeah, this is, I think, a really important question. I got asked this a while ago at another radio interview, actually, and the focus of this question really is not, is this innovation going to happen? It is going to happen. The question is where and who's going to benefit from it. Currently, we're not on a path to benefit as much as we could, or we can. And my hope, and at some point in the future, and I don't know if it's 1, 10, 50 years from now, somewhere in that range, we have to pivot away from fossils because we will run out of fossils eventually, if nothing else, right? Hopefully we do it beforehand because we recognize the environmental impact associated with using them. But we should be positioning ourselves right now to be strong in that transition because it's a global trillion-dollar transition. And currently, I don't think people are taking it seriously at some political levels. I don't think they recognize the reality of this. It's a short-sighted thing. I think if you think in terms of decades or multiple decades, anyone should recognize as an objective fact that we need to do this. But if you think in terms of 1, 2, 4, 8 years, people don't see this. And so I would hope, and I really, if anyone asks me, I really encourage people to think about this, not about themselves, but about their kids or their grandkids, and you recognize that you really need to embrace this. Otherwise, we will be beholden to non-U.S. resources for this stuff. The Chinese or else, Germans, China, Japan, Korea. These people, these countries have invested a lot of infrastructure, time. They've created huge research organizations, both in companies and also through government sponsorship, to attack this problem. And the U.S. effort is extremely small compared to that. And so it's a real thing.
And Jay Whitacre, last question. What would you tell rising or aspiring entrepreneurs about that are perhaps wanting to get in this renewable energy field?
Sure. I'm happy to give this advice, and that is take risk. Be ready to get out and fail. That's okay. Failure is part of this process. And really evaluate your relationship with your own failures and recognize that that's a teacher for you, and you're going to get out there and have ideas. Some of them are going to be great, but very few people hit this out of the park the first time. So understand that this is a process and that it is something that evolves over time, and that's thing one. Thing two is really understand the market before you develop a technology. I see an awful lot of people, especially in this space, developing a technology and they're not so sure quite where they're going to put it yet, right? And that's a recipe for a lot of spinning wheels. And what you should do instead is really understand what are the top 2 or 3 needs right now in this space, and what are the holes? What will connect something that exists out there already, or what's missing? Aim for that spot instead. You're going to have a much better shot at having an impact in your career than if instead you're just evolving novel ideas without understanding the context.
Dr. Jay Whitacre is the 2017 Leigh and Conn Prize winner for renewable energy, and he's the laureate for renewable energy at the University of Louisville. Appreciate you being on the show. Appreciate you coming to the University of Louisville, and congratulations.
It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to UofL Today with Mark Hebert, and go Cards.